Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck. And of course, that means some smart talk radio is in your future. And this segment, an interesting one indeed. We will take a look behind and into the world of terror with a terrorist expert, Dr. Ann Speckhard. She is a world-renowned expert on the psychology of terrorism and author of several books, including a recent release, The Bride of ISIS, One Young Woman's Path into Homegrown Terrorism. It should be an interesting talk indeed. Who is Dr. Ann Speckhard? She is a world-renowned, again, counterterrorism expert. She's an adjunct associate professor of psychiatry at Georgetown University Medical School. She's also worked with victims and survivors of the Chernobyl disaster, 9/11, and a variety of other terrorist-related incidents. She's a member of the United Nations roster of experts for the Terrorism Prevention Branch Office on drugs and crime, and much, much more. Should be an interesting talk indeed. Dr. Speckhard, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. I'm actually in the Midwest. So, hello, Kansas.
Well, we're actually sort of enjoying some decent weather around here for once. It's been a little bit rainy, but anyway, very happy to have you here. Let's start right here. You are again on the board you're an adjunct professor of psychiatry at Georgetown University Medical School. Why the interest, and how did the interest get started in counterterrorism?
Well, I was living overseas. My husband is now a retired U.S. ambassador, but he dragged me overseas. So I had to do something with myself. And we were in Belgium after 9/11 happened. And I don't know if you know this, but NATO was talking about the next target. Al-Qaeda was talking about the next target was going to be NATO. So there was huge security around NATO. They said they were going to attack a month later in October. And in Belgium, there is a huge Moroccan community of immigrants and second-generation immigrants. And there had been a plot in that community to attack Embassy Paris, to take a suicide bomber there. And there had been other plots. So being nervous wasn't completely crazy. And I did lectures and helped with the people that were working at the embassy and the expats. And then when those attacks happened in Russia, in Moscow, our first posting had been in Belarus, so I'm a Russian speaker now. And I contacted my friend and I said, we did a lot of psychological programs after 9/11. Would you like to do something for your hostages after Nordost? 800 hostages were taken in the theater there. And she said, this is Russia. We're not going to do anything, but if you want to come over, we could try. So I went to Moscow. We started meeting with the hostages, and we had no idea that they would tell us. I sat right next to a woman with a bomb belt on, and I had conversations with her for the 3 days that they held us, and I asked her why she's doing this. So this is the first and probably only time that people have interviewed suicide terrorists at the moment of their being activated. And we, through interviewing the hostages, captured those secondary interviews and learned a lot about what was the mentality of these people while they were willing to kill others. And it was very, very interesting. And then I had a student that was in a suicide attack, not a suicide attack, a bomb attack in Hebrew University. And he talked me into interviewing the Palestinians. So I went all through West Bank and Gaza. We also interviewed the Chechens. So I interviewed over 400 terrorists, or else if they were dead as suicide bombers, I interviewed their family members or their close associates. And we were always trying to figure out what put a person on the terrorist trajectory. If they had met a psychologist, what could have prevented it and what could have taken them off of it. And then I worked in Iraq to do exactly that, and I consulted with the Home Office in London to do exactly that. And I've been around the block a few times.
Indeed. I'm curious as to when you talk to these people, number one, I maybe I should assume, I think it's a reasonable assumption, they would tend to be younger meaning maybe 40 and under. And I'm curious as to, do they believe, because, and again, I don't want this to become too political, but historically, at least with the United States and many others, that acts of terrorism have done nothing in any real way to change the policy, so to speak, or the point of view of those being attacked. And so I'm wondering, are they making a statement, in your opinion, or are they truly believing it's a way to fight a war, so to speak?
Oh, they believe it's a way to fight a war, but they also want to express their outrage because in almost every case, they believe that they're the downtrodden, and that's why they claim the right to attack innocent civilians, because they say, number one, if they're following a Muslim ideology, which is a distorted version of Islam, of course, that it's a cosmic battle, and in this case, because Islamic lands, according to them, are under attack, that they can take extraordinary measures, and because they are facing overwhelming odds, they can engage in terrorism. But, there have been some cases where they have changed things, because the Madrid bombers changed the government, and certainly the Oslo Accords probably fell apart because of the actions of Hamas. So terrorists see small gains. They don't see that they win the whole thing.
Right.
Hardly ever, as you say, but they can be spoilers. And that encourages them. And, I have to say what I learned is there's a lethal cocktail of terrorism, and it comes from four things. It's a group, an ideology, social support, so some nexus of support around you, and then a vulnerable individual. And the vulnerable individual has his own motivations that may not have that much to do with the terrorist group's aims. If he's in a conflict zone, he might want revenge. He might be highly traumatized and just want to check out from life. He may just want the other side to feel his pain. He's angry because he's lost territory. His family members have been tortured, killed, raped. He's highly frustrated living in a conflict zone. He's a lot of violence. But if he's in a non-conflict zone, let's say like one of these guys coming from Canada, Belgium, now the U.S. as well, then it's off his track. Something's not going right in his life. If he lives in Europe, he might be discriminated or marginalized. He might be mentally ill. He might be fallen into a group of guys that this is their thing. Might be romance over the internet. But the individual motivations differ by the person and where he lives. But the group is always thinking strategically, how can I use these vulnerable individuals to fight for my political aim?
So many times the targets are not military targets. They're a subway that's blown up. They're a store or an open marketplace somewhere. And I'm curious as to, my guess would be that vulnerable, yes, misguided, yes, but my sense would be that a lot of these people that perform these acts are smarter than the average bear. They've actually invested energy into political thought, into some of the philosophical issues of which they're speaking. And I'm wondering how that counterbalances with their understanding that they know that they are going to go in and just for the pure the luck of the draw, they'll be killing men, women, and children who happen to be in a fruit market area when they happen to walk in there. And that doesn't seem to be deterrent to them. I'm wondering whether I'm always curious as to why it isn't more directed towards the actual perpetrator, so to speak, be it military, government, etc. So much of this is done to innocent people.
You're right, Warner, and you're very smart about these things. What I find is that there's clusters of types, and there's the smarter ones that are very passionate and look at society and say there's things wrong, and look at grievances and say, these are real grievances. And they're right. Society does not answer every problem. The way we've organized our government and so on, it's not perfect. And there are real grievances in the world. And Muslims, particularly around the world, live under dictators and terrible things happen to them. So the passionate and smart ones want to reorganize society, and they decide, okay, revolutions always have violence, which is really unfortunate. And they drink the Kool-Aid, and they believe that a certain class of individual can be killed. So if it's the militant jihadi ideology, then it's the kafirs, which are the disbelievers. And if you happen to be Muslim and get blown up at the same time, well, Allah will take you right to paradise. You're a martyr. But then there's also the mentally ill and the feeble-minded and they are so needy that they drink the Kool-Aid to meet their needs. Like, if they get seduced over the internet by somebody that, we know there's like a girl out on the West Coast that she tweeted out, why would anybody behead a journalist? Well, ISIS guys answered her. And she was socially isolated, living with her grandparents. Her mother had abandoned her. Her mother had an alcohol problem. She was a teenager, a Sunday school teacher. And she started, and when she tweeted this, suddenly she had all kinds of friends. And she was like, oh, I'm not lonely anymore. And they were interacting with her, answering her questions. And their answer, was like Jim Jones' Purple Kool-Aid, drink this. They said, we're in a revolution and we have to spill some blood. And by the way, we noticed that you're a Christian and you're a Sunday school teacher. Did you know that the completion of Christianity is Islam? Could we tell you more about Islam? So they started with more peaceful things, and they sent her books about Islam. They sent her chocolates. They sent her headscarves. And eventually she converted, probably just because she was so happy to have friends and belong. And she got very, very interested in them. And over time, they started saying, would you like to marry a mujahideen? Would you like to come leave your home? And by the way, why don't you bring your little brother with you? So these kids were minors. And thankfully, the grandmother caught on and stopped the whole thing. But so there's different types of people. There's people that are passionate, smart, college-educated, and they're thinking, I want to change the world, and I'm willing to use violence to do it. And then there's people that are feeble-minded and are just, whatever meets their vulnerability and their needs, they go into it.
If you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis, from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio. Got an interesting one going here with Dr. Ann Speckhard. She is a world-renowned expert on counterterrorism. She's also an adjunct associate professor of psychiatry at the Georgetown University Medical School and has worked with victims and survivors of the Chernobyl disaster, the 9/11 terrorist attack, amongst others, and a member of numerous councils and organizations that not only research, counsel, and also provide advice on terrorism, and a brand new work called Bride of ISIS, One Young Woman's Path into Homegrown Terrorism. Let's take a look at the new book. Tell us a little bit about it. And again, I understand the inspiration, so to speak, for it, but tell us specifically why this person and why this particular journey.
Okay, well, Warner, all my books up till now have been nonfiction and based on real cases. So I wrote about a transgender Navy SEAL. I wrote about a Canadian extremist that went undercover and stopped the Toronto 18. I wrote about my 400 interviews. And I wrote about a murderer. And I always like the psychological angle because I am a psychologist. But this time I got fascinated with the case of Shannon Connolly. She's a Denver girl. At age 17, she converted. She's raised in a Catholic family. And after she converted, she started looking around on the internet for what is this journey, what is Islam? And she took on a burqa and a niqab. So a lot of Muslims wear headscarves, and they just consider that a sign of modesty, covering the hair. But the ultra-conservative ones cover everything and only have the eyes showing. That's what she did. And I could not understand why she converted and why she wanted to cover herself so completely. And since I couldn't get the answers to that, I tried to interview her family and her. I decided to fictionalize it and use a composite of cases that I knew about. But the story follows hers. And what Shannon did is she got on the internet. She found Anwar al-Awlaki. This is a Yemeni American who speaks perfect English, who started making videos and audio tapes, and they're all on the internet. We droned him in 2011 because he was instigating for terrorism in Yemen, and he lives on the internet. So you can still find him today, and he inspires from beyond the grave. And there is hardly a terrorist attack in the West today that didn't have something to do with him. We're finding that the Chattanooga killer also followed him. And what al-Awlaki teaches is he teaches all about the good Islamic life and how to, have a good marriage, how to be clean and live a good life. And, oh, by the way, as a Muslim, you have a duty to jihad, and you should come to the battlefield and fight. And if you can't, you should create an attack at home where you are. So Shannon started believing this, and she downloaded a guerrilla manual from Al-Qaeda, and she studied it, and she decided maybe I should do a VIP attack inside the U.S. and she knew how to use guns. So she got on the FBI's radar, and they ended up interviewing her 9 different times, every time trying to warn her off. And at one point, she showed them the guerrilla manual, and she said, I really seriously considered carrying out a VIP attack, and we need to punish the U.S. for invading Iraq, and military targets, law enforcement, and civilians are fine targets, according to what she had come to believe. And they didn't have a basis to arrest her because she hadn't actually done it. And so they just kept watching her. But of interest to me is that they tried to talk to her 9 times. And that tells me the FBI is good at law enforcement and good at figuring out who's who, but they're not good at what I do and what an imam can do of, really challenging her on her beliefs and why she would have taken this on. But over time, she then developed a relationship with an ISIS fighter, and they would Skype. And over Skype, he proposed marriage to her and that she come to Syria. So at one point, she invited her dad into the Skype conversation because in conservative Islam, the proposal is made to your father. And this guy proposed to her father. And, of course, the father said, over my dead body. And eventually, Shannon's father realized that she had a one-way ticket to hell. And he called the FBI and turned her in, and she was arrested. I fictionalized the case, so I made reasons why she converted based on other real cases, and I wove in some other cases that the FBI and Homeland Security are chasing, all based on real cases. And this is the only work of fiction you'll read with endnotes in it, so you can find out what's real all through the book. And then I changed the end and made it read more like a thriller. And I'm not going to spoil the end for you, but throughout the book, you're wondering, is this kid really going to self-destruct, or is what's going to happen to her?
Right.
And so it's a good read, but it's an educational read because you're reading from someone that knows terrorism, that followed real cases, and tells you in the end notes, if you're interested, or the author's note, I made a chapter at the end that explains everything and tells you what is absolutely true fact.
Dr. Speckhard, share with our listeners, if you would, from your perspective, the difference, if there is any, in the recruitment, education, retention, and maybe the probability that a young woman would follow into ISIS versus a young male.
The recruitment is different. And what we're finding is ISIS is trying to establish a state. So those guys are over there long term. They want to be married. They've picked up Yazidis and other minorities to be sex slaves, but they grow tired of them and they don't want to have their children and their family with those people. So they actively try to recruit young women to come over and be their wives, and they're very seductive. So let's take, for example, there was a French journalist who put up a fake profile, and because she was trying to learn about terrorism, and on her fake profile, she endorsed a jihadi film of a French fighter over in ISIS. The same day he contacted her, and he said, I saw you liked my video. Are you interested to come over to Syria, and would you like to marry a mujahideen? And he just went after her. And she details it, and she gives all the details of how he told her she was beautiful, how he told her that if she came to Syria, that ISIS would pay a dowry to have her, that she could ask for anything she wanted, a house would be provided, her life would be materially good, that she would live in a pure society, that she'd have nothing to fear, that he would take very, very good care of her. And, you think of a girl that's struggling in her life, and Western girls are facing all these contradictory messages of you should be, super sexy like the pop idols, and you should also be educated and able to make your own living. And here this group says, no, let's go back to like 1950s. You come over here and everything will be provided for you. We'll take care of you. None of those struggles exist anymore for you. All you have to do is wear a burqa, and we're building a utopian state. And yes, there's some bloodshed right now, but we're going to get to the point where we rule, and we already rule, and you will live in peace, and you'll have a family and a house, and you won't have to struggle ever again in your life.
And the fact that they are aware of ISIS and the reputation and some of the horrific things that they've done, and yet that's not enough to send them into another direction.
Well, if they start asking questions about it, the ISIS guys are smart enough to deflect it. And they say, do you know about the airstrikes in Iraq? Do you know about the women and children that have been killed by U.S. airstrikes? Do you know, this and that? So they, twist it around. And then they also say revolutions always shed some blood, but this is a revolution for good, and Muslims have been under attack forever. And unfortunately, that line that started with Al-Qaeda of Muslims have been under attack is one that resonates with most Muslims around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, because they see the Palestinians, they see the Kashmiris, they see the Chechens, and some of them are living really uneasily. I lived in Belgium for 7 years, and I have to say, if you were a Moroccan Belgian, second generation, had a college education, you could still show up in a nightclub, and the bouncer would say to you, "Go home, Moroccan."
Right.
And that's nasty.
Right.
That's got to hurt.
Right. What about, are you finding that the recruitment is necessarily pointed at those young ladies that live in Western culture, or is it around the world?
Oh, no. The Western fighters love to marry Western girls, and they'll even admit that. They'll say the Syrian women don't relate to them. And they'll even say explicitly that the Syrian women are very conservative in the bed, and they want a woman that, feels comfortable to serve them well. And so they want a Western woman. They want somebody from their own culture who drinks the Kool-Aid just like them.
And it's interesting to me that ISIS is not recruiting locally, so to speak, as much as they are worldwide. It's as those that know them the best maybe are not necessarily the best recruits. Well, listen, this is a fascinating discussion. We do need to start winding down here a little bit. I'm curious from your perspective, are we headed towards, is this happening more and more often, or is it slowing down because people are seeing it's a dead-end street and they're really being used as pawns here? Or what's your perspective, Ann?
I don't think that people are understanding that they're being used as pawns. We have some initiatives in the U.S. now where they're going out and they're teaching imams what's on the Internet. And the imams are in total shock. Because they're just a pastor trying to take care of their congregation, do the burials, do the funerals, do the weddings. And they don't have time to read what teenagers are reading on the Internet. And they're completely shocked when they see that ISIS has learned how to download things from Call of Duty and all these games that kids play and twist them around to now be jihadi videos. And when they see these slick social media, they're like, oh, my God, literally, oh, my God, we have to protect our kids. And my view is we're going to see a lot more of what Al-Lati calls staying in place, because it's very easy to get a vulnerable person and get them all and buy a gun. That's a new guy. And they don't even have to have direct contact with them. And they've gotten so good, and social media has gotten so good, that you can really feel connected to the people that you're interacting with. I mean, the guy that was seducing the French woman, he was texting her all day long, Skyping with her every night. And, I don't know about you, but when I get on Skype, I almost feel like the person's there with me. I mean, of course, it's not the same, but you feel connected. It's not, the way it used to be that you had to be face-to-face to recruit somebody. Now you can do it over the Internet. And I think we're going to see a lot more stay and attack at home. We're going to see so-called clean skins, people who have no criminal or terrorist record, attacking. And I feel so sorry for the FBI trying to sort through all the people on the Internet.
Right.
And one thing that's good is that with ISIS, a lot of these people in the West take on a new identity and they want to brag about it. So they do endorse ISIS sites. They do put some, marker like a flag of ISIS or something on their social media. But still, those are thousands of people. And the FBI has to figure out, is this somebody we should go and do surveillance on? Or even
Well, because of
Remember
this, because of the, as you just said, because of this is now, we're not fighting necessarily armies, we are fighting individuals. Do you believe that our counterterrorism organizations, be it the FBI or whomever, other law enforcement, do they have the tools needed to do this? And if they don't, should they have, so to speak, quote, expanded power, which I know gets into all kinds of issues of the Constitution and individual rights, et cetera?
I don't think we need to relinquish our rights. I think most of this is discoverable open source. So, I mean, it's true, they do go, once they start recruiting somebody, then they do go into, I'm losing the word for it, but encrypted. They do go into encrypted at times. But, you know, if you've got a readout on somebody's putting stuff up on Facebook or on their social media, and almost every case, this guy in Boston who wanted to attack Chicolo, he bragged out on his social media. The Chattanooga killer, he made some statements, although less so. Channelly endorsed. So oftentimes they make things on open source social media, and I hate to see us relinquish our because, you know, we can also suffer from a government that has totalitarian powers, and, you know, it's very hard for people in power to resist abusing that power.
Yeah. Well, it is a fascinating subject and one that, unfortunately, we will be talking about, in my opinion, here for decades to come at some level. The brand new work is called ISIS Brides, Female Face of Terror. Excuse me. I was going to say Bride of ISIS, One Young Woman's Path into Homegrown Terrorism. Dr. Ann Speckhard has been our guest. A fascinating look here, and I appreciate her time so much. Dr. Speckhard, how can people find out more about the work that you do?
Well, I've got a website, so it's Ann with the E, A-N-N-E, Speckhard, SPECKHARD.com. And everything I do is on the website, and all my books are on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. They're electronic and in print. And I hope your listeners enjoy the book. This one is an easy read and really reads like a thriller.
Well, I really appreciate the time and the work and the energy that you put into this subject. Best of luck to you, and would love to have you on again sometime.
Goodbye, Kansas.
All right. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
You bet. We'll be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.